Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Califf, for being here. Thank you for all the FDA does. We appreciate all of your efforts, and as you mentioned in your testimony, we have the safest food supply in the world, and we owe a debt of gratitude to your agency for working with partners in the food industry to make that happen. But against the backdrop of also some of your testimony of the supply chain challenges that we're facing, food shortages, also the extremely high cost of food we're dealing with now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the food traceability rule that your agency released last fall. 596 pages, very broad ruling. Just the definition of high-risk foods itself is over 100 pages. And my understanding is that the specific food items that will be identified as high risk, that hasn't been made yet, but could number in the tens of thousands. My concern is there's always this fine balance of trying to do the right thing, but then also not having unintended consequences. The feedback I'm getting from grocers, large and small, is that it's, while possible to implement this, for the larger grocers, they can do it. It's going to be staggeringly expensive. It's going to cost a tremendous amount of labor that they don't really have right now, but they'll figure it out. But ultimately, they'll be able to pass those costs along at a time when folks are really struggling to put food on the table to begin with. But on the other end of that spectrum, the smaller grocers, and that's where I'm really concerned, there's a lot of worry that this ruling could actually put them out of business. And I represent a district that's largely rural, a lot of areas that have food deserts where they're lucky to have a single grocery store in the town, and they're not the large national chains that people are aware of. There's a concern that we may drive food out of our districts altogether if this rule is implemented. Can you help allay my concerns there? And then as we look to roll this out, is there going to be a mechanism to look at and go, okay, if we're getting unintended consequences here, are we going to be willing to look at this and explore it? Because some of the feedback I've also gotten is during the remarks period, there was a lot of feedback discussing these concerns that seems to have fallen on deaf ears. So I'd love to get your take on all that.
Well, let me first of all say I'm from South Carolina. I think I have a feeling for rural America, although I grew up in the big city of Columbia, which but surrounded by relatives that lived in rural areas. And we're also seeing this decline in life expectancy in our rural areas. It's very troublesome. And if there's no industry or business in those areas, it's going to continue to decline. So I'm very sensitive, and I think the whole FDA is. I think all of the questions, many of the questions you all have asked today bring up this balance issue of we need to move to the future, but if we move too fast, we particularly punish the small business component of any industry that we regulate. I'll just say we're very sensitive to it. We have seen the comments. We're going to do everything we can to accommodate and help small business achieve this point. And being a bit of a techie, having worked at Alphabet as part of my career, I'll just say that the digital world doesn't have to disadvantage small businesses. In fact, if you look at cloud technology, it doesn't matter if you got one person or 1,000 people. You should be able to hook into it if we get the systems right. And so we're going to have to do this one step at a time. As I said, educate before you regulate. Also be sensitive that if we're disadvantaging small business, particularly rural business, too much right now, we'll be very attuned to that and make course corrections. Sometimes it means you need to take a little more time than you expected, or to put additional educational programs together that help people come along and survive in a tough business environment.
So do I understand correctly, there's a 2-year implementation period for this rule now?
I don't have it on the top of my head, but it's something like that.
Okay. So I would hope then if we get into this, and particularly in the trying times that we're in now, that may be an overly aggressive timeline to try to comply.
We'll be very sensitive to that. As I said, I've been an inspectee and been on the other side of the fence, and almost everyone that gets regulated would like a little more time, but sometimes it's really the right thing to do, and we'll be very attuned to that.
Very good. All right. Thank you. Now you'll back, Mr. Chairman.